7 years ago, I found myself clinging to a side of a mountain in Alaska. Caught in a raging windstorm that would forever scar my body from frostbite and nearly destroy my faith. What I didn't realize at the time was that God was going to use that storm to bring about some much needed changes in my life, in my heart, in my marriage, and it was ultimately going to lead to my husband's soul being redeemed. At the time, I was living in Alaska, and some friends and I decided to go winter camping. It was a rare sunny day in Juneau, forecasted to have amazing northern lights that night, and we just wanted to get outside and play. We hiked a peak south of town. It was hard. It was winter and cold, and I was with 3 extremely fit guys. But we did it and made it to the top, made it to the summit, and man, I've just never felt closer to God. That's the reason why we climb mountains, I think, is just to experience those epic highs and the incredible beauty that He's created around us. We made the decision to camp up high. We just wanted to maximize the sun, maximize the northern lights. So we spent the hours before bedtime building a 6-foot high and 4-foot wide snow wall all around our tent, basically cutting blocks of snow and stacking them up like an igloo. Later on that night, as we're all crammed in our tent, drinking our soup, trying to go to bed, we can just hear the winds picking up. We kind of realized that maybe the forecast was changing unexpectedly. It was meant to be windy that weekend, but the winds had kind of blown through earlier in the day, so we thought we were at the tail end of the storm, but we were actually at the beginning. My husband, who was with me, looked outside and saw that the wind had just basically whittled our snow wall down to about half its size. At this point, we all discussed making an exodus and going down the ridge. The winds just, they just kept getting more intense, and they basically blew our entire snow wall away. So without that protection against the winds, the guy lines securing the tent just couldn't maintain, and they pulled apart at the seams, and literally our tent burst like a balloon. Within seconds, any gear that wasn't immediately on us or stuck in a bag was just scattered to the wind. It was blown into the darkness. I mean, we were like literally trying to hold on to sleeping bags, and it's just like you didn't stand a chance. It was the scariest thing I've ever encountered. But God was there in that moment. He, in all of the chaos, He, gave us the wisdom to find our crampons, which were buried in the snow, as our snow anchors. And we managed to all find jackets and a headlamp and gloves and an ice axe each. And, we didn't have food, we didn't have water, we lost basically everything, but we had We had the kind of bare essentials that we needed to at least descend the ridge. We were forced to get off the mountain at that point and make our way down this ridge line. It was hard, it was scary, it was much harder than going up. We could only see what was directly in front of our headlamps. You couldn't really look up because the wind was just blowing icy crystals and snow like directly at your face, and any part that wasn't covered, it just felt like you were in a sandstorm. We managed to descend the ridge probably a couple hundred feet before the terrain just dropped off into a saddle, and at that point the wind basically funneled even more directly at us. So what was 110 mile an hour winds was now much more increased, and you could just feel it like wanting to blow you off the mountain. I mean, we were lying there prostrate on the ground, crampons, ice sacks, like clinging to rocks, and you could just feel the wind wanting to pick you up like a kite and toss you off the mountain. At that point, we retreated back uphill, several hundred yards to where we found an outcropping of rocks. And we sat there basically until the next morning, trying to come up with a plan. Between the four of us, we had one sleeping bag. We had 3 backpacks that we could use as insulation to sit on. Again, we didn't have any food, we didn't have any water. One of the guys in our party, his down jacket flew away, so we had to put him in the sleeping bag. So 3 of us took turns sitting with our backs against the rocks, our legs and our crampons like bracing us, holding us into the mountain. And then we had our friend sitting on our laps. And the 3 of us rotated, sitting in the middle, trying just to stave off hypothermia, and also just taking turns holding on to the 4th guy in our party. The winds, unfortunately, didn't die down that next day, so we had to spend another night on the mountain. We ended up sitting in that location for 30 hours, and we couldn't move. We couldn't move from that spot at all. We had found this little eddy away from the wind, where we were somewhat sheltered, but as soon as you tried to crawl around, we did make a couple attempts that next morning to descend, but as soon as you got away from that shelter, it just knocked you over. Like, we just didn't stand a chance, and we knew if we were going to survive, our safest chance would be to wait it out. So miraculously, we had one cell phone that worked still. By the grace of God, we had battery, and it was able to send out a signal. So we were able to send a text message to one of our friends who was in Juneau Mountain Rescue, and they initiated a rescue to try and come and get us. They contacted the Alaska State Troopers, the U.S. Coast Guard, Juneau Mountain Rescue, and a handful of volunteers. But the same windstorm that was preventing us from getting off the mountain also prevented everyone from coming to save us. While we sat there, we watched a U.S. Coast Guard Jayhawk helicopter make 3 attempts to try and come and get us and drop off supplies. pretty disheartening when you see your help right there in the sky, you know, trying to bring you some much needed water and food and warmth. I've never been so cold in my life, but they couldn't get close enough. So it was, again, about 30 hours later after the tent blew apart. It was the following Monday morning where the winds kind of seemed to be subsiding. They were more like maybe 50 to 80 miles per hour instead of 100 plus miles per hour. Yeah, so we were trying to psych ourselves up to make this long descent down the ridge. And about that time, we saw two rescuers that, you know, were trying their hardest to get up to us. And so we kind of just decided to wait till they actually got to us. And they basically were a gift that revived us enough to get off the mountain. At that point, you know, we all descended. We didn't physically have any injuries that we knew of. You know, we didn't fall. None of us were like hurt or broken. So we all walked off that mountain all the way to the trailhead. At the trailhead is where the ambulances were waiting for us. My knee had kind of been bugging me on the hike, so I was like, yeah, okay, I'll go get my knee checked out. You know, crawling along, I thought I cut it on some ice or something, but it wasn't until I was in the ambulance that they wanted to check us all out for signs of frostbite. And I couldn't get my boots off. I couldn't, even with the help of the EMT, get my boots off. You know, it was basically while we were in the tent still, and that wind was blowing, it was blowing snow in through the vents of the tent, and some of that snow ended up landing in our boots. And in the chaos, you know, I put on some wet socks and they ended up freezing to my feet, and then the boots froze to my feet. And so, you know, after a serious struggle, we managed to get the boots off, and it was just looking at a corpse, like just hard, white, dead feet. It was myself and my friend Nat who were medevaced up to Anchorage at that point because we both had serious frostbite. Tried to do whatever they could to, you know, increase blood flow back to my dying digits at that point. But frostbite can really only be treated in the first 24 to 48 hours. And so by the time I think I got to the hospital, it was just a bit too late. So after a week in the hospital of basically just trying to manage my pain, I was discharged and I flew back to Colorado to live with my parents so that they could take care of me. I had been living in Alaska with my husband, but it was clearly evident that I needed to be taken care of and wasn't going to be able to work for some time. So I spent the next several months trying to get better on my parents' couch. The mountain was scary. It was terrifying. It was horrible. But sitting in a wheelchair for months after months after months and just watching my feet slowly die. You know, the way frostbite works is it's a waiting game. Like, you lose circulation and you just have to wait and see how much is your body going to get back. And in the process, everything turns black and disgusting, and, you know, your skin falls away, and it's so gross. And so I just sat there really angry with God. wondering why this happened to me, why he wasn't healing me. What I didn't realize at the time was that while I was fighting for my life up on that mountain, God was going to use that storm to just bring about this different change in my life. You know, he was going to save my heart. My husband was not a Christian at the time, and he and I had kind of unknowingly built our relationship on what we could do together. He's very adventurous. You know, we loved skiing and rock climbing and kayaking and whitewater rafting and, you know, just spending our time outdoors. So when I wasn't able to do that anymore, it was really hard to relate to him. It's just this huge loss in my identity. You know, I felt like I was stripped of my reputation, my independence, just who I was, life as I knew it. Like, I went from being successful, living on my own, independent outdoor lifestyle in Alaska, to living on my parents' couch again, completely dependent upon them for everything. I would go to prayer meetings at my church and, you know, ask for radical healing of all my frostbite. But I just kept hearing over and over God say, no, Amy, it's about your heart. It's about your heart. I want to heal all of you. Give it to me all. Like, it's about your way of living. I just want all of you. And again, it just made me angry. Like, I had unknowingly built my life up to my expectations and based it more upon what I could do. I loved being independent. I loved living in Alaska. I moved up there to, you know, go backcountry skiing, ski big mountains, go flying. I was a successful helicopter mechanic. I worked in heli ski camps. I was part of Juneau Mountain Rescue. So while I was in Colorado, kind of just waiting to have surgery to amputate my toes, my husband was able to come down and work from Colorado and be with me while I waited for surgery. And he, with the help of a pastor friend of mine, was convinced to join a small group at our church. It was just one of those days where I was not having a good day. He was not having a good day. I was just consumed with anger about my situation and even just frustration on how I was going to stay married to this person I couldn't relate to anymore. But we both went to growth group, even though we would have rather been anywhere else that night. And God just moved. He moved in Craig's spirit, and, you know, with the community support around us, my friend Dan, the pastor, just asked Craig if he wanted to have Jesus in his life, and Craig just melted and said yes, and so instantly all this frustration and anger that I'd been holding was just gone. And it was so clear that I was going to lose 6 toes in this lifestyle I loved, but I was gaining eternity with my husband. I've asked myself a lot why I had to go through that, why I had to be in that situation on that mountain. God just keeps reminding me that in Romans, he says, you know, he works all things together for the good of those that love him and that seek him. I cling to that. I cling to that daily, you know. God just continues to show me that no matter what the struggle is or what the battle is that I'm facing, he's going to use that for his good.